Someday I will tell you one of the most amusing stories involving Gary and two nuns that showed up after It's too long to tell here.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and as you heard from that opening clip, we are digging into the making of the ISB. This is a panel discussion from the 50th anniversary convention, recorded live with an amazing cast of characters, and some of them are characters. I think it's an accurate word. David Neubert proposed this session, and before the convention began, he got in touch with me and asked me if I'd be interested in moderating, and I, of course, said yes. What an honor to do that. So we will be hearing from David Neubert. We'll be hearing from Barre Phillips, and that's going to be via video, or audio in this case, I guess, and then also Lawrence Hurst, Larry Hurst, and that was a clip from Larry Hurst. We'll get into that story that he was sort of hinting at as well. Then thoughts from Lucas Drew. Lucas was not able to make it, but David Neubert shares some of Lucas's thoughts on this historic occasion, which Lucas had an early part in. And then sitting around the table are Gary Karr, Barry Green, Jeff Bradetich, Paul Ellison, Madeleine Crouch, David Murray, Douglas Mapp, Kristin, Korb, and I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. We chat for a couple hours about what it was like in the early years, the timeline for this organization, and it's just a great conversation. I know you're going to enjoy it. And if you'd like to follow along with this ISB coverage, contrabassconversations.com/ISB will take you there. And I'd like to give a shout out before we get going to our sponsor, D'Addario Strings. Enter to win a set of Kaplan strings. D'Addario is giving away 10 sets of Kaplan strings, and you can go to contrabassconversations.com/strings to enter. Gary Karr uses Kaplan strings, Andres Martin, Klaus Freudenstein, Gabriele Raggiante, Michael Valerio, so many other folks, including me. I love the Kaplans. I've been using them. They sound great under the bow and great as pizzicato strings. I'd also like to thank the Bass Violin Shop. And if you're looking for a professional setup, repair, or restoration at a reasonable price, check them out, bassviolinshop.com. They also specialize in resetting necks, repairing cracks, installing new fingerboards, new bass bars, and custom C extensions. Okay, we're going to kick off this making of the ISB with some audio from Barre Phillips.
And happy birthday to Gary Karr. Gary, I don't know if you would remember, but we met at the Lincoln Center early in 1964 when I was playing a piece of Larry Austin for improvising trio and orchestra that Mr. Bernstein had programmed then. In the green room, at one moment, maybe on stage, I don't remember exactly, Leonard Bernstein was there with you, and you were there, and he introduced us, said hello. Anyway, I'm wishing you all the best, sending the best regards. Sorry I can't be with you. Have a great time. And may the bass keep going and going and going.
Sounds like me.
God, you can't turn it off.
That sounds like me. I do that all the time.
Greetings from the Sarasota Music Festival. Sorry I'm not there with you in what surely will be one of the best ever ISB conventions. In rereading the history of the ISB, it became very clear to me that the evolution of the organization reflects the revolution in bass playing caused by its founder, Gary Karr. Prior to his arrival on the international classical music scene in the early 60s, solo playing on the double bass was non-existent, a rarity or novelty at best, and when the instrument was heard in a solo capacity, was quickly forgotten because of the repertoire presented or the inartistic playing, or both. Gary changed all that, and he knew that at the time, the best way to disseminate his visionary ideas was through the written word. Gary's famous TV appearance with Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic certainly jump-started solo bass playing like never before. and dramatically demonstrated the power of mass media and the double bass. In fact, I wonder how the internet would have changed things in the world of bass had it existed in 1960. There are always key players in the history of any organization, and I think the key players in the ISB, besides its founder, of course, were Barry Green, Lucas Drew, and Jeff Bradetich. These three, perhaps more than all others, kept the organization alive, and in some way, either through newsletters, conferences, or other means, kept it before the eye of the public and other bass players and enthusiasts all around the globe. There were several times early on when the organization was in very close proximity of ending, and one of these three gentlemen stepped forward, picked up the reins, and continued. I remember very well one of the first bass conferences in Madison, Wisconsin that Gary put together. It was very well attended, and everyone had a ball. Someday I will tell you one of the most amusing stories involving Gary and two nuns that showed up after the It's too long to tell here. That's Gary about. 50 years speaks volumes regarding its relevancy to each generation of players and pedagogues. My first involvement with an ISB convention was in the early 90s at Interlochen, Michigan. Those of you who were there remember it well because it was one of the hottest first weeks of June in northern Michigan history. You could literally see the varnish melting on some of the instruments. From these early beginnings to what surrounds you now at these fabulous facilities and this very special group of musicians is testimony to the vibrancy and continued relevancy of the ISB. I have always believed that music is first and foremost a language that communicates as no other language can. Likewise, I think that bass players are a bond of instrumentalists and musicians that have a special camaraderie wherever and whenever they get together. I know it will happen again there in Ithaca.
Now, there's another person that couldn't be here, and that was Lucas Drew. So he sent me some material, and I had to get that one here, and I'm going to read that to you. I was 10 years old, and Mrs. Brady introduced me to the double bass, or string bass, as it said on the two-a-day folder. 2 years later, in 1965, I got to hear Gary Karr play a solo recital at my junior high school in Pacific Grove, California. Now, that was something I wanted to do. The closest thing I got to playing the bass solo was a rendition of Old Man River, accompanied by Mr. Lee, my junior high orchestra teacher. That was at the same school. I really loved playing those low bass notes. Okay, that's my beginning. Now I'm going to go to Lucas Drew. This is what Lucas Drew said. I had met Gary the summer, just after his New York Philharmonic debut, which was, by the way, April 14th, 1962. I looked it up. He played solos with the orchestra at the Brevard Music Center, and that's the North Carolina Summer Festival. I was a young faculty member there already, speaking for Lucas. Then the next summer, I guess that was 1963, Gary was on the faculty for the entire summer, full time. It was truly a bass summer. In 1974, Gary asked Barry Green to continue the society as head and me as editor of 3 newsletters and the journal, Bass World. We did this for 8 years until 1982. Barry deserves credit for his musical and organizational skills, particularly the ISB name and expansion of the conferences. And then I asked him to tell us a funny story. So this is his funny story.
Here it comes.
Gary was at Brevard at that time in 1963. He had his Kusavitsky Amati in his cabin, but was playing on another bass that summer. possibly it needed adjusting. That was my question.
Oh, okay, I'll tell you all about it.
I played solos with the orchestra the previous 5 summers, but this year I had forgotten to bring my bass. Unexpectedly, Gary offered me the Amani to play John Boda's Concertino. That's
true.
That look is true. He's a card.
There's more here. I participated in the first International Institute of String Bass, ISB, conference in 1967 held at the University of Wisconsin with Gary and Madison. In 1968, I put together 7 issues of double bass notes, encouraged by Fred Zimmerman as a newsletter featuring publications, research, and double bass events. Later, double bass notes transferred to a column of the American String Teacher magazine. This became known as the Bass Forum. I know I was an editor before too. Which I edited, encouraging bassists to join the ISB. I was the first double bassist elected to be president of ASTA, the American String Teachers Association, from 1982 to 1984. I also helped start the electric bass major program at the University of Miami, although I never was an electric bassist nor taught electric bass. So that was the history. That's what you wanted to tell us.
Thank you.
Now we get started with the formal thing, and I just wanted to say a couple of things that I'm going to have Jason be our moderator. He's going to be asking some questions, but I just wanted to say that one thing that I think in all this that we've done, and we'll talk about the survey that Jeff and I did on the history of teaching, but I wanted to point out that I think this term that was given, the inspire, educate, and connect, is so true, and that the thing I want to point out is that it really is about educating and teaching. And all these bass players are all handed down, all these different generations were for their teachers. So it's really interesting to trace that lineage. And when we prepare a discussion, I'll explain how there were 2 primary schools in our country and how they evolved. It has to do with their bow ties, and there's all kinds of things that go into that. I don't want to take up all the time right now, but that I'm going to hand it over to Jason, and I need to find, is there a chair for David?
there.
Great. Well, I'm Jason Heath. I'm so glad. Thank you, David, for asking me to host this. I'm a former ISB board member and longtime ISB member. I think I joined when I was 13 or 14.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and so this is super fun. I've been taking notes and got lots of questions, and we got a lot of talkers on this panel, so I don't feel like filling the 2 hours. But I think maybe we should start with what Larry Hurst asked, which is, Gary, can you tell us the story of?
The nuns.
I don't remember.
Nice try.
Good answer.
Did you walk into a bar?
Well, there was a flasher around, and we were walking together, and one of the nuns fainted, the other wouldn't touch it.
And so we begin.
Yeah.
You described so eloquently in your opening remarks just the history of the ISB, but maybe this in this form we're recording this, and we can maybe use this for something. Could you maybe just share the beginning of the International Institute for String Bass? Just tell us the story of that.
Well, I was on the faculty of the University of Wisconsin, and they had developed one of the first outreach programs of any college in the United States. And what outreach was, going into the state, into high schools, and doing all this sort of thing, which I participated in. And I suggested, well, if we're doing this, why not excite some bass players into learning our instrument around the state? And that hadn't been done before. And that was very successful. So I came up with the idea of maybe forming an international group. And they supported it totally, and they said, that'd be terrific. We'll publish a magazine. And I said, great, we'll find an editor. And they said, you're doing it. I said, good, well, I'll do my best. I'm not the best writer in the world, but I'll try. And that's how it started. And they came up with the funding, and then we decided to have a conference, our first convention in Madison. And I put the word out through union magazines mainly. And we thought it was the biggest crowd ever. We had, I think it was 52 people show up. But that's all the room we had. Yeah. And an interesting thing I just found out, Richard Davis holds a camp there for young people in the same building, the same dormitory that I rented. And so it's amazing. All these years later, 50 years later, it's still happening in the same place. Yeah, wow. It's amazing.
And probably about 50 kids now.
50 kids, yeah. Yeah.
Well, as we fast forward all these decades now, we're here with 1,400 plus people in this facility, and it'd be fun to maybe start with so that first event, what was happening at that event? You were teaching, were other people teaching? What was going on? Can you just
Well, I always took the back seat. I wanted other people to do all the talking. And so Warren Benfield was there. He was very prominent and gave daily talks and lessons. And David Walter came, and he was talking a lot about repertoire, and as did Stuart Sankey, who was there. And then Ron Carter showed up, and he was doing his thing. And then this was kind of exciting for me, and I have a tape of it somewhere on a real analog tape. I'd like to see if the tape still is any good. But we did Bach suites together. I played the Bach suites, and he did a jazz thing with it. And that was might have been one of the first crossover demonstrations.
We need to hear that.
Yeah.
We do.
Things like that happened. Yeah. And then there was a lot of playing, but nothing compared to what we have today. I mean, it was so primitive, really, when I think back. Yeah.
And would you mind sharing just maybe the bumpy road that ensued after those three conventions, and kind of how we can sort of take it into Barre restarting the organization? Can you tell us the story of that?
Well, I think I mentioned that in my speech.
Yeah.
I thought everything was really great. Well, Elizabeth is here. I mentioned her because without Elizabeth, we couldn't have possibly kept it going. Elizabeth Wallace, why don't you stand up? Yeah, we had a rough time. What didn't go smoothly is my bad judgment. I was incredibly stupid, and I needed help because I was touring a lot and teaching a lot at that time. So I couldn't devote myself even part-time daily to the task of keeping the organization going. So I hired someone to help me, and she turned out to be a bad number, and so she all but destroyed it. And then I had moved to Halifax, and we did everything we could to resurrect it, which we did with the help of Dalhousie University. I always went to university at that time to help because they had the printing presses, they had all the what we needed to get the publication out, and then. I realized, this is doing better than I thought it would, and I figured, now it needs the next step. It needs someone who could really devote some time to it, and Barre was amazing, totally amazing how he did it, and you should talk to him now.
Hi, Barre. Can you maybe share how that restarted this in just those early 70s and all the things that you started to spearhead in the bass world and starting this organization?
Well, I didn't know anything about anything until 2 boxes showed up on my door. No, not exactly. No, we actually go back several years prior to that, and so when he called and asked me to continue or bring this back, my first reaction actually was, who can help me? Lucas was actually doing an organization. He had this publication that was going on in Florida, and in a sense, we merged Lucas into the ISB, and his journal skills by producing that journal became the right hand of the ISB because he became the editor. And honestly, we were co-runners of the organization. We had a board, which was an honorary board. It wasn't a functioning board. But David Walter was actually our president at the time, and we had a few other people that were just helping us support to continue the organization. And it was Lucas and I as a committee that allowed things to go forward, and Lucas produced the publications. It was nice to go down to Florida a few times and from Cincinnati in the winter and do some of the work we had to do together. But he was just indispensable. And also another person, we all have these people. Debbie Tomlin Taylor was my right hand in Cincinnati who addressed all of the envelopes, did all the paperwork, did that stuff. And my students, as I'm sure the drill happens when the stuff comes, 1,500 publications come from the printer. It's ISB week, and then everybody comes in and starts licking envelopes and doing that kind of stuff. But Debbie handled that kind of stuff. I directed it, but there was a team of colleagues and students and many other people that made all of this thing happen. We can't ever do this kind of stuff by ourselves. And I never thought twice about, people said, well, what did you think and all that kind of stuff. I never thought about it. Maybe that's one of the keys. My wife, Mary, says the one book I haven't written should be really my best book. And she put the title on How to Make Denial Work for You. And so I take on things and I don't think about that stuff in a state of denial, and I think that probably has helped me a lot.
So you're publishing the journal and you're sending those out, and your students are doing their, putting in some team effort, getting those out there. And then the Summer ISB School starts up, late 70s, right?
Right. Well, actually, our first conference
74.
was
74, because I was at String Congress that year. It was 77.
Because 76 was Aspen.
Okay.
And that was officially our first conference. I mean, Stuart Sankey was teaching there at Aspen, and we worked together because he had a bass community there that was in existence. And so we made that our first convention in 76. And it drew a lot of people. We had wonderful guests, as we normally do. But I didn't like the convention. I had an emotional reaction to that convention, and it was primarily with the inspiration of a great colleague of ours, John Deek. He came in and he did a concert. Anybody remember John Deek doing the Flatlander of Colorado? And it was just like a one-man music band, and it was such a introduction to the world of what's going on. And we had one guest after the next. Every hour we had a different person. It wasn't enough for me. It's like 1 hour John Deacon and he's gone. And then we get somebody else and then they're gone. And so Aspen was a program where they were there all the time, and we came in for that thing. And then so we did have the Congress of Strings in Cincinnati. I used to teach at it in Los Angeles and initially in Cincinnati, and then Paul came in and replaced me in Cincinnati. And I thought, why don't we get these teachers, the same teachers like John Deek and everyone else that followed, and get them to spend a week with us and have our course, and we'll stay a month and we'll learn from them and we'll really absorb something. And that was selfish, but it just seemed an imperative thing because you're exposed to something and you gotta have it, and so that was the formation of the International Bass School in place of conventions. And we ran that for 6 or 7 years. and we brought in everybody. It was just wonderful. I mean, Eugene Levinson was our first. We would have an international guest. We had a world-class jazz person, and then more and more every week, guest clinicians and shorter-term clinicians. Levinson started it, then Francois came in 78. We started in 77. We had Golyov, we had Rodney Slatford, we had Petrocchi. Oh, there you are. Hi, Paul. That's another partner in crime, and then the Frank Proto here too is responsible for many of the of the partnership arrangements that happened. The conclusion of my tenure was the Zimmerman-Mingus competition, which was that was a huge event, and that was, yeah, and that was Frank and I. The school was really unique because we created in Cincinnati a bass world. I was doing crazy programs during the year and that were different, essentially aimed for the public. And during the summer, we had the Summer Bass Forum, and every week we had a concert with our international soloists, with our whole group, with ensembles. We commissioned new pieces for every concert. And some were outrageous. It was an event, and we had crowds. We would do a bass concert, people would show up. There had never been a bass soloist with the Cincinnati Symphony before I became principal in '67, and I played 3 concertos with the orchestra, and then Rabat has played at least 2, and there have been soloists since then. So solo concertos with the symphony had become normal. Things at CCM with bass concerts become normal. And when we did Zimmerman-Mingus competition, we had front page, full page spreads on the jazz competition, the classical competition. And as most of you may know, we brought in as judges and as clinicians and as artists, just literally the world's great players, and they had competition, which I'm not crazy about competitions, but nevertheless, we chose a classical and a jazz winner, and they're rather well-known choices. I mean, it was Edgar Meyer. Anybody ever hear of Edgar Meyer? Or John Clayton. Anybody hear of John Clayton? And that was kind of the tenure. But what I'm most proud of is the fact that we grew the bass not only nationally and internationally, but we created a community and the public. Our programs were geared on the public. One of the very first bass forum things was our Fountain Square thing, where you have a classic picture on there with Rabat. That was actually the second year, and we're playing down on our town square on a truck of some kind with, at that time, 30 basses or so, and the front lineup of those people, I don't know, you'd have to name them off. It was really stunning, and we were all students. It was really pretty amazing, so that's kind of a big...
Well, creating a bass scene is like a talent of yours wherever you end up, Barry. So just that, and it's remarkable. I'd love to hear how Jeff Bradetich, how did you come into the picture and take over the organization for so many years?
Well, I went to the first ISB bass school.
Jeff was our first student assistant.
Really?
Yeah. You remember that? You forgot.
Did I forget to help?
Our TA.
I don't remember doing any help.
You were our student representative. You were a child at the time. You were. I mean, you were our helper, and you helped us do the whole thing.
And you weren't
in the very beginning.
You weren't as tall as you are now.
Oh yes.
I was thinner, but well, I went to the bass school in '77, and that was such a wonderful thing, as we had David Walter and like you said, Levinson and John Deek and Frank and Paul, you were there, and of course Barry, every day technique classes. It was really a great entity. I don't know how you afforded it financially. I'm sure it was difficult. It was 4 weeks long, and that's really hard to perpetuate.
It's the denial thing.
No major grant money. Turned in a lot of favors, I'm sure. So I was involved there, and then I was a participant in the in the competition in '81, Zimmerman Mingus, and I had just started teaching at the University of Michigan that year. And that's when you decided to step down, and he contacted different people to, at least this is the story you told me, to take over the ISB, and nobody volunteered, and then you opened it up, and I was the only person to apply. That's what you told me anyway. And so there was a choice of nothing or me, so I was, I guess, better than nothing. But I did have the backing of the schools. I went from there to Northwestern right away and had their support. And so that's how I remember getting involved. I'd always been interested in organizing things. I've been organizing a number of things before that even, in small type of things. But with that came the first convention that I did in Chicago in 1984, and then I kind of oversaw those 4 conventions: Chicago, Austin, where David was the host, and LA, where we played a mass-based concert at Disneyland, Mickey Mouse conducting, and of course the New York concert, convention where we had Milt Hinton birthday party at Town Hall. Did you play in that, John?
Yes, I remember the taking the A train with all the bass players.
I was going to say, John arranged the A train for a mass bass group. We had an outdoor concert in New York, in Washington Park there, and then we carried the basses, one person carrying the scroll of one bass and the in pin of another, and we went like an elephant train to the subway. We went down in the subway, unloaded the basses, and John led us in playing the A train, and sure enough, the local television was there, and it was a real memorable thing.
We went to Lincoln Center, yeah.
And then in that same convention was David Murray's New York debut at Carnegie Recital Hall at that time as the winner of the first in the 1988 competition in Los Angeles. So some great
played the Battle of Jericho on a bass. I had a bass that I was using, and I had the end pin out, and Milt wasn't very tall. And he came over and he said, he didn't have a bass plan. I said, here, use mine. Let me set the end in. Oh, I don't worry about that. He gets up there and he perfectly in tune and just goes at it. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. What a guy. Anyway, that's another story.
That Subway concert was on the front page of the New York Times.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, I got to go back and look. I never saw that. But that concert at Town Hall, the birthday concert of Milt Hinton, was it his 80th?
80.
I think it was 80.
Okay.
Joe Williams sang, Marcellus was there, and of course a legendary bass. I mean, it was, and all these people donated their performance there. Yeah. So that was a pretty big deal. It was a fun time. But I wanted to say one thing that I think is partly the reason we're all here at this moment today. And when I first started with the ISB, I wanted to, having studied with Gary in the summer, I wanted to get him more involved, and I know you were reluctant at that time, and I think part of the reasoning was just what you explained to us in your address the other night, and you felt that maybe you should stay out of the limelight and let it be, everybody else. And I took your advice, but by the end of my time, we were able to draw you back a little bit and give you the award. But I think what has really been the big success for this wonderful relationship we have with you now is Madeleine's wonderful work over many years, not just in everything that you see, but in this special relationship that the two of you have. I can tell that there's more there than we see, and that's really brought Gary back in the fold, full force, and rightfully so. So I'm glad that that's been able to happen.
Madeleine's been really good for me because I have to admit that, only to this crowd, I don't want everybody to know, but I'm incredibly shy, and I have to overcome it every time I walk in front of an audience. When I retired, because I was doing a lot of concerts every year, the stress started peeling away. I didn't even know I was carrying it around, that stress from being shy and have to go out on the stage and face a lot of people all the time. It was really hard for me. It's hard for me even today to walk in a room where there are a lot of people and to go to a bass conference, because I've attended very few, basically because I was scared to death. You know, it was frightening to me. And I would run through the halls so I could get out really quickly. It was hard. And Madeleine made me feel really comfortable, and she said, come on, you know, you can do it. And I must say, I'm having a ball. It was a lot easier with 50 people, and you were there, and we didn't really separate into groups. We were just one group, one 50 people group, and we just sat, and I think it was just a big schmooze from a whole week, and so it wasn't really. I'm not the greatest organizers. These are the guys that are totally amazing. Of course, Madeleine, but I'm really grateful. Thank you for.
Very happy.
Thank you both for really getting me out of the closet.
I'm next. So.
Let me just finish. I just wanted to say that I was editor at the same time of the magazine, and this was before computers. And I don't know how it is today, but nobody writes articles for the magazine. You have to beg, borrow, and steal to get them to write something. Probably the same way. So the article would come in, hands, if any of you know Bert Turetsky, with the crayons and the big red exclamation points, and you're trying to figure out what he wrote, and then you have to edit it. Then you take it over to the print shop, and they put it on their machine, and then they would print it out, and give it back to you a couple days later. And after the first convention, I actually became rather ill, and so I remember going home with this stuff, and I would lay in bed just to rest, and I would be editing this print, and then the next day I would take it back to them, and they would fix the corrections and give me another correction. I'd go back the next day and fix whatever was left, and then once that was done, then you hand it to the layout person, and that layout person then cuts it and puts it on those old, you remember those old boards, and this type of thing, and then you take it to the printer, and you tell the printer, well, really, I would like this page to be over here, and pretty soon they're just ready to shoot you, because it's, I'm an amateur and not professional, but anyway, my time was a great time. I had 2 young children at the time, and teaching and so forth, but it was just a great way to be involved in the profession, and got to the point, though, that we finally, during my time, were able to hire a full-time person. Couldn't pay them a lot, but they worked full-time, and it just got to be too much for me, got to be too big, and the last thing I did was to reorganize the structure, because if I was the only one that took it over from you, and I talked to others, we didn't really identify anybody to take it over from me, realized that it needed to go into a more formal structure. And I basically just took the ASTA setup where it's president-elect, president, past president, and at my last board meeting, David, you were there, we voted on accepting that as the format, and that's the way it's been ever since, and it works really well that way, and hopefully these people will tell us. So that's for me.
Yeah. Well, and David, after the Northwestern Convention, you were the first host after that, and this tradition that's been established of moving around. Can you just talk about how you got involved in all this?
Well, it all happened, Jeff, I was teaching at Wichita State University in Kansas, and Jeff came, he called me and said, would you mind if I come over and do a bass, I think you want to do a recital and a bass class, master class. I said, sure, yeah, come on down, this is great. So we got there, we hit it off pretty well. And he goes, it's, all these other people I went to, they were so reluctant, they didn't want to, let me come in because they were afraid they were going to take my students and all this stuff. I didn't understand, why would that be a problem? I had gone to Gary's, that first summer camp at Karr, and my first teaching job was in Massachusetts. And I remember I was student 0 because I was a teacher. I wasn't a so they didn't know how to classify me. But that's kind of when I met a lot of the people. I mean, Diana was there, Jamie, Vandermark, I think Eugene Levinson was there.
Yeah, that was his first appearance in the United States.
And I remember there was a piece I was working on. It was some obscure thing I got out of the Eastman Library. He just said, "Oh yeah, here's how you do it." Oh, okay. And it was interesting because that was the summer. I had been playing French bow all the way through school because I studied with Oscar. And then all of a sudden, when I was playing with Springfield Symphony, I remember I played Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and at the end of the symphony, my hand was so tired, I thought there's got to be an easier way. And that's when I remembered the German bow, because you could German bow. And so I thought, well, I'll learn how to do this. And so you kind of guys, I think you were the ones who taught me how to play German bow.
I did.
Yeah, without even knowing. I guess it was just your observation. But anyway, that's how that happened. And then when I got to Kansas, then Jeff came in, and we became real good friends. And then Jeff said, I got this little problem. I've got this, this is back when they had the Apple II computer. That was it. I mean, there was Radio Shack computer.
Remember floppy disks?
And I had just acquired an Apple II. I did a summer seminar grant for the National Endowment of the Humanities at Dartmouth College in 1980. I was a young assistant professor, so I got accepted for this grant. And I got to work with John Appleton. And this is why I got involved in a lot of electronic stuff, because, John was the pioneer in the electronic music era. And that was always kind of my hobby. Oh, by the way, before all this, in 1975, when I was in Eastman, I wrote Moby Bass. That was my first piece, electronic music piece. And that's a whole other story. I don't want to spend a lot of time in that. We're going to have another interview. I'll go through all these details. But anyway, going back with Jeff. So Jeff comes in and he said, gee, I have this database which has all the members of the ISB, but it's corrupted. I can't access the data. And he said, can you help me? And so I said, sure. So I took it over Christmas break. I was up in Wichita, in Kansas, and I was in the basement. This is at Tara's house. And I was in the basement, and I cracked it. I got the information all out. And the other thing we were working on is we worked on a survey about the teachers of the United States. And this is where I came up with this theory about, I think we can, did I do an article on that? We made a conclusion.
I don't remember. We made a presentation at the Austin convention.
Well, I spent a lot of time there in the basement, and I got that put together. And then I think I saved the ISB at that point, didn't I? And then with that, then I had that database. Do you have the surveys, or do I still have the original ones?
I may have passed them on. I don't remember.
Okay, all right. Well, we got the information someplace. But what was really interesting about that was we discovered that one of the questions we asked was, we asked each of the teachers that we surveyed, probably about 80 or so, about who their teachers were, who their students were, whether they sat or stand, and what type of bow they played, French or German. Those are the basic questions. There might have been some others. But what I concluded was there were two, it all pointed to two people. Hermann Reinsheims from New York Philharmonic, who happens to be a German bow player. And you could call it the Simandl School, I guess.
He was a student.
Student of Simandl. Mm-hmm. There you go.
Yeah.
And then
direct line.
And his teacher and one of his students was Gary Karr. But Gary was in Los Angeles, so I didn't quite understand that. Well, it turned out that's where he retired, was in Los Angeles. So there's a whole school of bass players that came out of Los Angeles, Southern California. That's where I grew up. That's why I ended up seeing you in 1966, I guess.
I never knew that.
Yeah, you came to my junior high school. I remember looking up at your bass going, wow, that's really cool. I want to do that. Inspiration, there's your inspire, right? And then the education came in. And the French bow. We have the connection. The ISB is the connection.
And the French bow, come on. French bow. The French bow side.
The French bow, the other
second side.
Oh, the second side. The other. Okay.
The other side.
Enough of it. The other side is Curtis Institute. Anton Torello was the professor there. And it turned out that Anton Torello was Oscar Zimmerman's teacher. Now, I studied at Eastman with Oscar.
And Warren Benfield's teacher, who I say.
Which was, there's the French
Gary
connection.
was with.
That's the French connection. And then, of course, and all this is going on. Meanwhile, there's this other incredible player out there, Francois. And I sort of knew about him, and that's when I went to Texas. And I thought, I got to hook up with this guy, Paul, down in Houston. And that's how that connection was made. So it kind of went full circle. But I think what was the other thing that was really significant, Jeff, that we did? Other those. Okay, then Jeff didn't talk about this, but he organized the ISB. He created a nonprofit organization. We're a 501c3, so we had to have a board meeting. When you do a 501c3, you have to have by law, you have to have a president, a vice president. I don't think we had a vice president, and a treasurer and a secretary. Well, since I was really good at writing, because Jeff also had me be editor of the magazine for a while, so I learned a little bit about that, but thank God we got me on that. But anyway, what was I saying?
Board meeting?
The board meeting. We had a board meeting at Sam Colstein's house in New York. And the people that attended, I ended up becoming the secretary. And then George Vance was the treasurer. So that's when I hooked up with George. And I think this was right after LA 88 that Paul Zivitz did. That's when we had that. So it would have been 89. And one of the issues, of course, was getting solvency again in the organization. So this is why we created the board. And then I think the next meeting we had, it was right before New York. And now it's David. You weren't on that board at the time.
Just the vote with Jeff.
That was right. Okay. I'm trying to piece this all back together. Then one of the things that came out of the meeting is, Jeff, you mentioned, was it you that mentioned Don Dillon Associates?
No.
Or is it
Larry? It was already after I had stepped down and John was president already.
I know where I got that. It was Jackie. She was in
Jackie Dillon, his ex-wife.
Yes. That must have been.
But no, actually, Larry Hurst was on the ASTA board and the ISB board simultaneously. And so he said, because we were managing ASTA, the company I worked for managed ASTA for about 3 years before they opened their own office. And so he said, you could call these people.
Right. And also Phyllis Young was on the faculty there. So, of course, everything that happened was all around Phyllis, and she was all ASTA. So I served as editor for the ASTA, the base forum. I think Patrick Muir did that, and David Walter did that. So there were several of us. And there was an article, this is what I remember. I did an interview with Gary. And that's where, I remember, Jeff, you talked about bringing Gary back in the fold. I said, well, let's do an interview. And that's how we did it. And I mean, in that interview, you had a picture where someone said that you played with a microphone to amplify it. And all it was, you were using it for a talking.
It was a TV show.
Yeah.
And it was, the camera's there and the mic is there.
Right.
And it was Sam Applebaum and his, what's the name of those books? The Way They Play. And he was, and the article wasn't finished. It was supposed to be the next edition. They were going to finish the article that you wrote. Yeah. And I told them after that, I lost dates over it. A lot of dates, actually. Some really, really neat dates that I wanted to play. They said, well, I understand you need amplification. And I said, no. And I was kind of shocked. And I told him, I said, no, I don't think you should do any more on me. I was afraid what he might do the next time.
Well, anyway, so we had that. We came out that article. I think everything turned out okay.
Yeah,
and we got you back again.
Yeah.
So,
thank you for.
My pleasure. Thank you for inspiring me. 10 years old.
So it's interesting to hear how ASTA was like a model for getting everything organized and structured. There was some overlap with Larry Hurst, and Jeff, you finish up your time there, and then John Clayton. John, you were the first president after Jeff, right? How did you get involved with the ISBs initially?
I'd been a member for years before that, but Jeff called me and I remember you sounded very desperate. And asked me, begged me to consider it, and like he did, I said yes, absolutely. And the things that he'd set up, the model that he'd set up, made it really easy for me to come in and be a part of the board, be the president, heading up the board, etc. And as we moved forward during one of the meetings, I'm trying to think who was there. Paul, you were there.
Yes.
But anyway, Larry, as Madeleine said, Larry Hurst said, because we were struggling to keep the organization going, moving forward with conventions and all that sort of thing. It was just an uphill battle organizing this because everybody had lives. And even though we were a board that would come together, it was after the meetings were meetings of good intentions. And then, so the work supposedly came, and the work always just sort of dissolved. Anyway, at one of the board meetings, Larry Hurst said, I work with a great organization we should consider, Don Dillon and Associates. And we had a big discussion about that. I mean, it sounded great, but they were expensive. And we weren't used to having to spend that kind of money to have a year-round organization organize the ISB. And honestly, I think at that time, we didn't know if we were large enough to warrant bringing on someone like that. But after that meeting, or more meetings, I can't remember, after that meeting, we decided let's just dive in. We're serious enough about the organization, and hopefully it will help us grow. And Madeleine, I think, if I'm not mistaken, didn't you come into a board meeting?
I did.
With Don Dillon?
Yeah. Don got a call from you in August of 1991.
Yeah.
And he came to me and said, I just had the most interesting call. And Asta had gone, or was getting ready to go away, but to open their own office. And so he asked, that might be a client that I'd be interested in working with, because I have a music degree and I'm a crummy failed pianist, but I love music and love listening to it. And I said, gosh, that does sound interesting. Yeah, I'm interested. So I went to a board meeting in Cincinnati, and that was when Dennis Knight was on the board still, I think. The late Dennis Knight, and Barry came into the meeting, but Frank Proto was on the board, and I think all the tall people that were in that room. I walked in and must be this tall. Yeah, must be this tall to join this group. So, but it was it just felt right.
Yeah.
I think, if I remember correctly, the ISB had $3,000 in the bank and 1,000 members.
Yeah, but we owed New York University.
Yeah.
And that's one of the main reasons we went to you.
Right.
Because you had the answers of how to help us save
Don took you on, yeah. And of course, Don his organization was founded, his first client, he used to be president of music educators, or executive director of AB&C, and he left that job to marry Brenda, his wife, and moved to Texas. So his first client was piano manufacturers, and then he had a couple of other clients, but then we picked up, print music dealers, National Association of School Music Dealers, ASTA, ISB. Now we do the Viola Society, and now the Violin Society of America, who are the makers of all the string instruments, as of 2 years ago. But it was it was a great meeting, and everybody was so welcoming and friendly. So what we do when we get a new client is we just kind of dive in and we try to learn as much as we can about that client as fast as we can. So I think the first summer that summer I went out and bought some CDs so I could start listening, and I listened to Sunday Afternoon in the Village Vanguard. I put that in, and I thought, well, so I listened to that for about 3 months. I mean, it was just nonstop because it was so beautiful. And, the benefit, I think, of just having a home office, because clearly we're standing on the shoulders of, everybody here at this table. So,
in fact, that's right. You gave us an address, a home office, because we were using yours, as I recall, in Illinois, which was not working. The university, which was dumb, which was not working out. And also, you helped us become that one of the issues that was really needed to be looked at. From my point of view, was the fact that we were an international Society of Bassists in name only. We were not international at all, really. So I wanted to really make it such, and because of Madeleine and her organization, she had the outreach and the means to really start cultivating that. And now we are, in fact.
Well, and you had the idea already of having like international representatives. Of course, it's so hard to do back in the days before the internet, and I mean, exchanging money was hard, so you always had one person there. It was in charge of getting memberships. Very complicated. So.
We did have Steve Martin do Australian Bass Society from very beginning. Sure. We had LA, we had Danish Bass Society, we had Klaus.
Those things already existed.
They already existed.
These were around, and they were affiliated. They would have a page, even from the very beginning in our thing. So we really, reached out and helped let people know that we can get together and you could define your organization anyway, and that we can affiliate and share what's going on around the world.
Yeah, that's true.
But it always could be improved, that's for sure.
Yeah, I didn't mean to diminish that. But if you looked at the attendance at all of our conventions here in the States, that was really problematic. And every time because I lived in Holland for 5 years, as you know, and the word around Europe was that this organization was very American. And that just always rubbed me the wrong way, because I was like, no, we're international, And I actually talked about those.
To tell you the truth, it's kind of still an issue. We tried very, very hard. The magazine to have international representation. Of course, where magazines published in English, and we try to get things translated. I mean, it is an issue, but I have to say, maybe the '95 convention, when Gary came to be there, we had Franz Pellinger came from Austria, and we had a number of international artists that came, and I think that kind of started this movement towards, because 30 countries will be represented at this convention.
Wow.
I mean, we are, the ISB truly.
We started with 9 that first
exactly.
4 in Chicago.
And it just
little by little.
Yeah, little by little. And like we've done an awful lot of outreach, especially thanks to Kristin, to Mexico, South America.
Asia now.
Good, heavens, and Rob Nairn, who is not here, really reached out formally to China when he was president. That was one of the big things that he did, because he'd done some teaching there. And we have Lou, who is one of our best ambassadors to China, sitting right here. So it's just, everybody does their job. Everybody travels. Everybody's an ambassador. They reach out and work on behalf of the IB, spread the word. And I think what I hear from our, international folks, our members that don't live here, is that coming to the ISB convention is a very liberating place to be, because I think what the ISB has always been is a open, play what you want to play the style that you want to play whatever bow you want to play, anything. Just be what you want to be here. And so when people come from other countries, I feel like in some of the other countries there's a lot more, maybe some nationalism or some interplanetary warfare among studios, and so when they come here, they're very, very free. I'll tell you a funny story, and I'm not making fun of Mr. Planyovsky, but he wrote a letter once, as he submitted a proposal for one of the conventions. This is a long time ago. And he said, I think we should have a nice dinner for 10 to 12 people and discuss why we need the French bow. That was serious.
He was a drinking book.
I just laughed my head off. I mean, even though I'm only an honorary bassist now, which I tell everybody I'm very proud of that because I have all the glory and none of the transportation problems. But that was a serious proposal. So, you know,
Musicians with borders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Tom did an awful lot in his tenure as president to also, you know, he brought Franco Petracchi for the first time to the convention. We have this short wish list of people that we want, and it's just getting shorter and shorter because every year we get one of them, you know, it's pretty exciting.
Can I just mention one thing about right after we had the Interlocking Convention, we had the first French convention, the Avignon.
Yes.
And that was really interesting. And there were a lot of things going on there. And I got to see a little of this what do you recall?
Interplanetary warfare.
Interplanetary warfare. Alive and well.
And Mittenwald,
And
too,
there was
wasn't it?
Mittenwald. That was another one.
91, I think.
And so, yeah, I think we have a lot of that. And I think that the feeling, as you said, is, you know, they're very respecttive of that, and they're glad we're here. You know, there's also, you know, we haven't done this yet, but I know in China, you know, Lou, you're probably going to organize a convention over there someday.
Well, actually, China is everybody bass player knows about ISB, you know, everyone, okay? So they are really looking for a magazine or kind of news or competition winners, all kind of uses. So it's wonderful. This organization is inspiring all Chinese bass players and really does wonderful things. You know, when I was first coming to the United States, and the first convention is 86, like Austin convention, then 88 Los Angeles, 90 New York, every other things, it's really inspiring me to grow up with that. I'd like to thank you for everybody sitting here for ISB here. So it's a really wonderful, wonderful organization. So I think the Chinese people all really appreciate that. Like, you know.
Well, and also we have this very comfortable, since 2004 with Barre's event that he did in France, which was so great. We've kind of developed this, like we have an ISB convention in the odd number of years, and then there's a convention someplace else that gets launched. And I think, especially in the recent years, there's been so much more partnership with us, you know, thanks to the internet, thanks to the work Kristin's doing online, that we're kind of become partnering with each other. So you'll see out there, you know, Alberto and Gabriel have their proudly, you know, put their banners up there, and so I think that's a great thing that we're kind of promoting each other now, and I think that's going to just get stronger and stronger.
Paul Ellison. Paul, I'd love to hear. We haven't. And just quick aside. I'll share this. I do a podcast about the bass. I did about 100 episodes last year, 2016. Paul was the #1 most referenced topic. #2 was Francois. But so.
That's because no, it isn't.
No. So like, we just we have a lot of people that have been. It would be great to hear just like how those early years of the ISB look like. I see all these photos from you and Barry like back in the day, like at all these events. When did you get involved with that and join the board? And how did that all work?
It was out of Barry's and my friendship that when we, as he said, when we realized that the Congress of Strings was occurring at the same time as this bass event, that we had to join forces. Congress of Strings was 8 weeks, and remember, the American Federation of Musicians paid for that. And they brought all those string players together for 8 weeks and paid their room and board, and they paid faculty. So we used to really get something for that, and it was important. Anyway, one of the other things that we added, which I still love and I'm very happy about, is we had morning sessions where pre-breakfast, and we would take a couple-mile run, and we would do some yoga, and we would do lots of stretches and exercises, and the point being that if you're a bass player, you are an athlete, And you'd better start addressing that. If you don't, you won't be either one for very long. And, it's been an important part, and now it's an important part of the magazine, and we have somebody addressing it. We had somebody addressing it that I was married to for several years before the person that's doing it now. It's been certainly been valuable to me and to my students and friends. That's something we did in very first 1977.
And you hosted the 97
convention
in Houston.
Yes, I've done one.
You've done one.
It's something you do once.
One and done.
Yeah, but pre-internet, there was this fax machine thing. And when you have faxes coming from Japan and you have faxes coming from England and Germany at the same, going day and night, the only thing you could do was get the best quilt that you had and arrange it over the fax machine so that you could actually go to sleep. Not have you could unplug the phones, but you couldn't unplug the fax machine. I mean, you could, but then you wouldn't get the faxes. So that was an interesting complication. And then Madeleine had to embarrass me into starting to use a computer and all of that. I was the Luddite at the time. You don't know how important it is. But it worked. You were very good and patient with me. Thank you.
It was great. And Paul's convention did something that none of our other conventions have done, at least in my tenure, was to have 2 world premiere bass concertos, one by Dave Anderson and one by Francois Rabat, with a full orchestra and major, and then also you had the super bass, Ray Brown and Christian McBride, kind of at the beginning of his career, and John. So it was
that final
unbelievable.
The final concert was, the first half was Hal premiering the Anderson and Francois premiering the last of Frank's pieces. And the second half was
super bass,
John and Ray Brown and Christian.
Unbelievable.
So it was
that's a good concert.
And the tickets were the hottest tickets in town because the hall only sat about 850, 900 people. There were no seats.
And Paul, that was the first time I'd ever had any kind of interaction with AFM, but you went to the AFM and got permission for the players to accept a lesser fee to play that.
We had a very sympathetic contractor and a sympathetic local, and everything worked out.
Yeah.
They were all happy to do it. It was mostly symphony people that played because they wanted to.
Yeah, it was great. But what never happened, you didn't, if you hadn't done that. So it was pretty terrific.
I drove a hard bargain.
I just want to make one other comment about the reason we have all these presidents of the ISB, and the reason it was set up, and Jeff and I talked about this, is we needed to have a place to host the event without this enormous expense of facilities. So we figured, well, we did this at Austin. The reason we did it there was because it was free, because I was there and the school said, hey, this is great. So that's how that whole setup got established. And I mean, Paul would have been president regardless, but that's where we had it, where you were teaching us. And just like we're having here, these are fantastic facilities.
But things have changed. So we no longer get the facilities for free.
Oh,
so it's usually the convention now starts, I don't want to get ahead of Jason, but usually the convention starts so far behind the 8 ball. And when you're president, you really are building it and hoping that they will come, because, the university costs this much. They want you to pay to have their pianos tuned. You need to have somebody to record the things. You want to have these great artists come, although they all donate their time. You want to have some place for them to sleep. You need to pay for them to eat. And before one person comes, you have this really, really big check. You got to have insurance, So nowadays it's almost like being like a concert promoter, and you need to come up with like the right recipe to make sure that when you have that board meeting in January after the convention, that people aren't saying, man, what were you thinking? But luckily, the organization is so strong, and people know that they're going to get a good show, a good product, that we haven't had like a major issue of late, but it's a serious challenge. And one of the reasons we can only do it once is, I suspect that in January, Nicholas Walker was very anxious that like all you folks would like show up because, like you're in debt until, I don't know if it's 700 people or 800 people register and actually give their checks.
Well, now the other sponsors for that are the corporate sponsors.
Yeah.
And the people selling things. And so, make your contributions, support the industry. Support your vendors, support us. That's what makes it happen.
Absolutely.
So
And
you really have to do that.
like Dave, the Gages, Robertsons, the big shops, big and small, but they really are, we couldn't put on a convention like that, and we absolutely couldn't. And they're the same people people go to them all year round for every kind of big and small event. So they're just really incredibly generous, and we can't thank you enough.
I think number one, membership is the biggest.
Yeah.
Membership is the key. Membership pays for 60-70% of our budget. So get out there, get other people to join. That's the most important thing. Get more and more people to join. That's what we need.
And do 2-year memberships.
Yeah.
Not that kind of
2001, A Bass Odyssey.
Oh, yes.
Was that your title, David?
Actually, Joel Morton, I think, came up with that title, but it was just perfect for that. And I still have the T-shirt. I should have worn it today. I have the T-shirt with the robot playing a bass. We really wanted Hal Robinson at that convention so that we could have the old Lost in Space. Danger, Hal Robinson. But it was inspired by that, and that was an amazing convention. An amazing experience. I remember getting the call from you, Paul, and basically you said, you want to run a convention? I went, let me think about it. And then I called you back the next day and went, okay. And
That's what it said.
Yes. And I thought this is an amazing opportunity to be able to be in this position. And I certainly could not have done it without the expertise of the board, certainly with Paul's experience, because of course he hosted a convention
that I learned from everybody before me.
Yes, and Diana then was in '99, and then of course with Madeleine, there's no way, and that's back in the days. Well, Don Dillon was still.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So we really communicated. You weren't running the whole Madeleine Crush Friends yet, so we became besties, and we still are. And there was no way that it would have been possible without Madeleine. And I certainly knew how valuable Madeleine was, but when you're running a convention, it was the best thing.
So, wouldn't go to school.
And not just for all the expertise in the work, but the fact that we worked so well together, and I think you've worked so well with every single person at this table.
It's easy to
it's
an
incredible.
easy job. I want to also note that at that convention, your convention, Gary gave that beautiful recital, and also we had the basis of Bill Evans' evening.
Right.
And Helene, that's when we were bringing Helene, Scott's brother, into the fold, and that was an amazing night, because I remember running around putting, and it was just, because we thought, gosh, we're going to have 3 45-minute sets, and I hope everybody does it. And I thought, I'll never be a concert promoter, never. That'll be the worst job ever, because it's so, it's so stressful. But that was an amazing 2 nights in a row. It was just to have Gary and then the basis of Bill Evans.
Well, that was Gary. That was your retirement recital.
Right.
We keep pulling you back out.
He keeps trying to get out, and I keep coming back in.
So but it's amazing that was 16 years ago already. So.
Yeah. Amazing.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Exactly.
Tom, you hosted in Western Michigan, Tom Knific. You hosted in 2005.
2005 was it? Yeah. A couple of things come to mind. My first convention was actually at Interlochen, where I had taught previously to coming to Western, and this gentleman was and David were there, And my first thought is like, sign me up. I mean, I want to be part of this so bad, you know. And I don't belong to a ton of clubs. I was always doing my work and organizing things, putting things together. I love to talk a little bit about that, like to build bridges. But it was just like, just being around, I've told you privately, but just being around you and being inspired, meant so much to me at that point, and certainly shaped my thoughts about how to relate to a lot of things in life, and certainly this organization. So I think it was Madeleine that called me maybe, 14 or 15 years ago about it. And I looked at my watch and I thought, aren't you calling me about 8 years too early? my first thought. And then it was my first question. And my second question was, are you still going to be doing your job at the organization in 2 years when the convention would roll around? And she said yes. And then I'm going to preface this next thing that happened. I was supposed to be meeting my wife, Renata Artman-Knific, who's been to, I don't know, almost as many conventions as I have, played at many. She's hosted the entire board in our home for a sit-down dinner as long as this table, in our pool for pool, I mean, you name it. She's done as much as any, board wife could possibly do. She's performing tonight at 8 o'clock. So I was late meeting her for the jogging track at the university, the quarter mile track, as we've been talking, and I got there and I called her. I said, hey, honey, guess what's going to happen? And she ran around and went out the exit of the thing. I was like, oh, hey. But it was just one of those things. It's like, it was hilarious. But, I prefaced that with, she couldn't be a better partner through all of this. Talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I've thought about everybody that came before me at that point in ways that I focused it in a certain way. I remember meeting Jeff the first time when I was looking at colleges and went to scope out Northwestern and meet Mr. Benfield. And I was a high school junior, I guess, and you were a college junior. And I remember he said, you got to come see one of my students play. Of course, it was him, and just jaw dropped and never stopped dropping, and then being influenced by you so strongly. Paul, I thought so much about your convention, when I thought about how to build mine. It made an incredible impression on me in so many ways, organizationally and everything. And of course, the depth of everything that came before was just remarkable. And I, having studied in Europe and being married to a European, and at that point working quite a bit internationally, I was really compelled to try to work that angle, and I tried really hard. I brought Terry Barre, invited him to the board, had Daniel Marier do his US premiere, and Petraki hadn't played in one of our events in forever and he's one of my teachers. I was going to make, it was going to happen no matter what, and that happened, and that was very important to me. Dwayne Rosengard, you probably know, is one of the great minds of the history of our instrument, and I was a bit of a heretic because nobody gets more than one slot, but I gave him 2 just because he has so much information to share, and he, between the different luthiers and the people he knew, he gathered more value and quality and quantity of instruments than probably anywhere before or since. It was just crazy, and it's documented. I was very cognizant of the technical side of things. I felt like sometimes in the past we didn't always, we were approaching it more from the acoustic side, and I felt sometimes that the sound reinforcement that was required for certain other events, maybe we needed to think about that more, and I invested a lot in the technical aspect. I think we had the first internet Wi-Fi, maybe.
Yeah, I think we did.
That, and we produced a conference DVD, which of the whole thing, and my son.
Kids did it. They were little boys.
My son was just graduating from high school, and his career was all set, and he was all lined up. But he had these other talents, so he developed a crew and borrowed a bunch of $10,000 cameras, and
they were high school.
They were all just
school
finishing
kids.
high school. They had it all worked out in a grid and put together a terabyte of data. And instead of enjoying his last summer before college, he edited that product, which is still out there. And I think it's a nice moment of you and your son. And it was just it was very magical. So I hope that that's part of our legacy. But anyway. Thank you. Oh, and the other thing, we're talking about Madeleine and the relationship. I just have to say she becomes family. You know, I can't imagine any of you feeling any other way. She's part of our family, part of our son's, mentorship, and it's family.
It's true. Remember the 2009 singing to Madeleine on stage?
Yes, yes.
Really sweet. That was really sweet.
And then Kristin, looking at the people who have been involved with conventions that are up here, it's such a bunch of amazing people up here. Kristin, former president, past, and then you were co-chairing the convention at Eastman, if I remember right. And then another thing that you did such a marvelous job is sort of like ushering the ISB online a little bit more. Like, what were some of the things that you moved the organization forward with, just in terms of like the digital side?
I didn't know anything about how to build a website, but everything I was reading about and hearing about and looking at even from my own thing as an artist, is how to communicate more directly with fans. How do you communicate with the people that want to go see your concerts? And I've been on numerous email lists, and it's always referring back to the website as a place where you can connect with those organizations and those people and get a different insight into what's going on. So for me, I really felt like, we have an amazing home office website that is so powerful, and all the stuff that happens at ISB World Office, it's the member management, it's this historical archive of all these things that have happened in ISB, and there's a lot of resources in that. But because of the nature of how that website is set up and built, I felt that it would be fun and perhaps important for people for the membership, because our organization is so alive. And I think about, we all get brought into this organization. We all have our own stories about our first ISB experience. And, for me, it was it's all about the people. And I think sometimes when you look at the home office site, we have a lot of history and all this stuff, but I don't get the feeling of the people. I don't get the feeling of connecting with you and having conversations and what are you doing and where are you playing and where's another festival happening. And I think for us to be a part of that larger community together, we needed something that was a little more fluid. Part of that in the convention was timing-wise, I've been to the Jazz Education Network convention, and they had an app. And it rocked my world. It was like, I could make my own schedule, I could read about the artists, I could read the programs, I could send a message to somebody and say, see you there, are you going? You really allowed me to feel more a part of the bigger community, even though I didn't know everybody, but it really allowed me to connect with those people. And I thought, well, I know because I've been doing this, I was brought in as a complete, I had no idea what was going on in '99, and I was called, I think it must have been Madeleine that called and said, we'd like you to do a concert for the space event. I was like, huh? Well, I don't have any money. You can buy me a plane ticket and I need a room, but yeah, I'll play. Not knowing what was happening. My first even remote inkling of hearing of ISB was I saw the 88 magazine somehow in Montana. And that was the same year that Jeff was working at camp in Red Lodge, Montana. He played B.B. Wolf. And I was like, what? But I thought because of, except for the fact that there was Ray Brown and John Clayton and all that, it's like this 88, oh my gosh, this is so cool. But I really felt like the whole thing was such a classical organization, and I just considered myself, because of no bass lessons ever, that I was really, it probably wasn't a group for me. I was young, and anyway.
But that concert, I'm just going to brag a little bit, because when she came to the event, she's a singing bassist, not just a bassist, but a singing bassist. And so she had 4 o'clock spot. She was in the big hall.
I had no idea.
And she was playing with Bill and Tim. So you're playing with Bill and Tim.
Oh yeah.
And I think you're doing a Gershwin number. You did the very first thing, and you started playing and people were out in the hallway, they could hear, and all of a sudden, people went, "What is that?" And they came rushing in to get a seat. And then after the concert, she had some CDs on the table. And all of these kids came running out, and they were gone in like 2 minutes. They were gone. They were as fast as we can sell them. It was like, what a debut. What a debut.
Thank you.
It was so exciting.
It freaked me out to walk out, and then there's like John Clayton and John Patitucci and Bert Turetsky and Rufus Reed, and I was like, no. breathe. But what I've come to understand more in retrospect, and I think I sensed it, but because it was so overwhelming, I wasn't able to really comprehend all of it. I mean, you know, because you're here. This organization is so much about paying it forward, taking care of each other, helping each other where we can. And if it wouldn't have been for the generosity of, I don't know who, I have ideas, but somebody paid for my plane ticket. And I'm sure that was a sponsorship. Somebody took care of my hotel room. I will forever be grateful for that. And it's because that was given to me, I need to give forward and help somebody else along the way. So for me, with getting back to the technology of that, anything that I could do to help facilitate bringing us as a community together internationally, to help give that feeling of, you know, we're this far apart from each other. You know, let's take care of each other. Let's be interested in what's going on in other places, and the personalities and the philosophies of the people that are making this beautiful music and making beautiful instruments and teaching well and all of that. So I learned how to build a WordPress website because, I mean, Madeleine in the office there, I mean, they're doing so much other stuff and they have so much more on their plates. And this was just something I thought, well, somebody should do it. It might as well be me. And so, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And as someone who builds a lot of websites, it's a monumental task.
And that's what I found out.
But thinking about just like the mission, right? Connect, inspire, educate, right? Just the connection aspect of that is just so powerful in this day and age, and with we all have our devices that it's doing that with so forward thinking. Even at that point, it's even like it gets more and more relevant every year. So thank you for everything you did for that. It's completely awesome. And Douglas, now as of a couple days ago, past president.
Yeah, I'm happy that it's over. I approached it as kind of a physician. I wanted to like do no harm. I see all the great things and like Madeleine, most of my conversations with Madeleine were like, how do I not do this wrong? You know? So I approached it a little bit differently. I tried to, you know, even spread the net a little bit bigger. You know, I had always noticed that maybe we could have had like more women involved. So I made sure that we had a couple of like even women jazz players. I mean, we've seen lots of like great women classical players and women jazz players. But I tried to make it a little bit more diverse. You know, every person who leads a convention leaves it with their own horror stories. And Kristin had told me a couple about like the presentation proposal, which I don't know how anybody did it before it was online, but Kristin told me that like somebody would write a letter to say, I would like to give a proposal.
And that
got mailed to Madeleine, and then it would get faxed to Kristin. So she would get all these hard copies. So I said, I think it would be great if we did it online, and I actually said it 2 years before the convention. So we spent a year building some infrastructure so that people could apply online, and that made it so that when we went to do the app, like Kristin actually typed in, I mean, she let a lot of stuff go, but that first app, a lot of the information that was in it actually got typed in. It wasn't copy and pasted. So.
And updated daily.
Yeah. Being somebody who was really uncomfortable with the written word and stuff like that, I said, I'm not going to type anybody's bio. I'm not going to type a description of anybody's thing. I'm not going to write down the name of any composer that has more than 18 vowels in it. So we really worked to like make it a little bit technologically easier. So even like the next time that somebody has a convention, it's easy. So you can do your applications online. I don't know how Nicholas did it because at some point the convention became a two-person job. So there was an artistic director and there was the site host. So the site host, and actually I would never host a convention at my university where I teach because I want to be able to go to work there the next day. When you're hosting a convention, you invariably make the people at the host site, happy or not happy to varying degrees. So you have to have a person who's willing to take it on. So Forrest was great.
Somebody with tenure.
So you actually say we're going to do this, and then you have somebody who can say they're not it's not their fault that there isn't toilet paper in the bathroom or something like that. So I just felt like really blessed because I remember the first time I went to a mass-based event, and I just said, man, I'm going to get to build something like Gary had something at Hart in 1981, and I went to that, and afterwards he actually invited everybody to his house. So think about having the board at your house, and then thinking about having maybe 75 bass players at your house. I just thought that was so special. So for me to be able to be involved at it at a level, and part of my personality, not mess it up. And I think we were kind of really successful with that. And we made money. And one of the things I'm most proud about, I just stepped off the board, is that if we think back to 10 years ago where the ISB was, we had all this love, but we didn't have online resources. I downloaded the first ISB, and man, I wish I would have been able to see that 30 years ago, that when Gary started, every bass player who I ever thought was the Sugar Honey Iced Tea wanted to be involved in it. So Ray Brown was listed as a member. Roger Scott was a member. Barry Lieberman was a member. So I think even from the beginning, bass players kind of, from their days of being ridiculed in high school for either carrying it or playing it, as soon as somebody said, hey man, we're going to have a club of bass players, every bass player was like, man, sign me up. We don't even need to hear you don't hear, man, don't you wish you played the flute? Right. Aren't you glad you play the bass? So that's kind of my story. It just really, I felt blessed to be able to be part of it.
And then Douglas did have our first ever real fundraising campaign, 50th anniversary fundraising campaign, and we hit $50,000.
Actually, I would say it wasn't the first one because I think the Gary Karr Rose was actually the first. And the Dear Madeleine CD was actually second.
Was huge.
And that was actually huge.
And that was Douglas's work with
Douglas and David, thank you.
That was
amazing. That was amazing.
We asked a who's who of bass players if they wanted to submit tracks to sort of thank Madeleine, but to help raise money. And they all said yes. And, we made money before we sold a single CD because all the people on the board, and actually many of the people who donated tracks, they donated a track, so they spent money to record something, and then here's my track, and I sent my check in. And we were able to do that all without Madeleine knowing it. Which is
complete.
Usually when you want to do something, you call up Madeleine and say, hey Madeleine, how do I do this?
That was a shock. And I want to tell you that I send it, copies, I gave copies to my dad for Father's Day. That was the greatest Father's Day present because he was so excited. So a lot of the sales after the convention were my dad. We got quite a few copies, but that was awesome. But with this, I think those were projects. But this was just we're not trying to. It's not to honor someone. It's to help the ISB out, help us out. Help. And we set an initial goal of $25,000, thinking, I hope we can make it, and we hit it halfway, less than halfway before the year was over. So, and there's some big donors in this room. So, Mr. Karr, there's a very large gift from Gary Karr, and also we should acknowledge Gary's gift of the Karr Kusevitsky bass to the ISB at this time because he could have sold that bass probably to a collector and it would be sitting in a cabinet somewhere. Probably in Japan, where he is a demigod. But he gave it to us, and I just. About the base is that its mission is to have 2-year residencies at shops that can take care of it properly, and to be borrowed and used by members for their recitals and recordings. And it did a residency at Eastman for about 4 or 5 weeks. It was in Utah for a tour of Utah recently for about like 2 months.
Even made it.
But it goes out from these shops and comes back, and it goes out in the world, and it's going to go to Romania this fall. But it's going to do it. So it's just really, it's really exciting to see the bass traveling around the world, having adventures, and it's always a thrill for people to play on it because they can come here and play.
That was part of my dream, actually. I formed the Karr Double Bass Foundation with the in '84 with the sole purpose of what do I do with the Amati at some point with the Kusevitsky bass? What am I going to do with that? At some point. It needs to be passed on to someone as it was passed on to me. I got it as a gift. And so I started the foundation, and I purchased a bunch of basses, and I loaned them out. And the idea was to get the mechanism going so that eventually the instrument would be well taken care of and it would be properly played. But then a lot of things happened, along the way. Airlines became impossible, and I couldn't imagine the Amati flying as I was traveling with it. The Kusevitsky bass, I keep thinking. Kusevitsky bass, and so I thought, well, I don't think the foundation's really going to work. My foundation is really because it needs that. It needs a broader organization to be able to assure that it's taken care of and also to be played on. So it was, having it at the ISB is a fulfillment of a really special dream of mine. So I couldn't be happier.
High school kids have played it, for their concerto winning competition. It's great. Yeah. It's great. It's an amazing thing.
It used to travel in a seat on the plane too.
Yes.
Yeah. Its first trip underneath in a trunk. Remember that trunk? It was Jurgensen in Norway.
Yeah. It was the first fiberglass trunk.
Right. Was on the Concorde.
Wow.
Fancy.
There's also, Gary was interviewed on NPR once.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the funniest interview because he was talking about just traveling with a bass and how he used to order a meal for his bass, and they'd call the name out, so they call it, what was it called? Mr.
B. Fiddle.
Mr. B. Fiddle, yeah.
So I ordered 2 meals. I went through vegetarian, all meals for the bass.
Yeah. Mr. B. Fiddle was a frequent flyer.
Yes, it was.
But that NPR interview was twice. It was in 2 parts.
Yes.
Because they wanted to know, first of all, I said I'm traveling to New York. And they said, okay, we want to follow you along the way.
Yeah.
Well, it turned out that my flight from Toronto into New York was delayed, but the bass was shipped ahead and to LaGuardia. And it stood in the carousel area. There was no guards or anything, nothing around it. It stood there for 2 hours. One of the greatest basses. Anybody could have walked off with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Yeah.
Well, anyways, you should look it up sometime. Listen to it. It's very funny. They kind of did it like This American Lifestyle with cute music. And it
was cute.
It's a hoot.
It was fun.
Do we have any questions? We have this great audience here who's been with us for this couple. Yeah.
I can't help but notice it says
Frank Korb family.
Oh,
the banner up there.
That's Frank Proto Proto's cousin, Frank Proto. Yes. Frank Proto has a cousin also named Frank Proto who lives here.
Oh, really?
And they had a little family reunion and I got to meet him. Frank says he's the one with all the money. So I'm going to look him up after the convention.
It's bank accounts.
I guess just now that we're at the 50th convention, what were some of the thoughts that came across your all's minds when you were thinking, wow, this is 50. Oh my God. What was actually some of the thoughts that came across when you guys approached Knific for this very special convention?
Just the memories of all the years. I mean, I remember when, Gary, when you still had the ISB, and I would arrive in the office and Elizabeth would be there, and piles of these magazines, and we were getting ready to mail them off. And that's when I first became a member. I remember I had the old Pro Bass. And so it just starts bringing back all these memories. And it's like being surrounded by 1,500 of your best friends.
You know, this is the first convention where the participants, and especially the young bassists, are stepping into history that is consciously acknowledged, that this is a historic thing, that we are honoring our history and that has been going on for this long. And there wasn't a single convention before this that went with the numbers. Maybe, I don't know, 20 or 25, I don't remember that. But the fact that we have a legacy, we have a history, we have online resources that goes back from day one that did not ever exist before. The people who come to their first convention are coming to a new era of a historic organization that has a history, and it really has begun today. The young bassists that come here changes their life. Everybody's first convention changes your life, but to have it now come into being not just joining a bass family, but joining a historic organization that is available to everyone from the very first words of Gary is a special thing. And so thank you, Madeleine and Gary and everybody that has brought us to this point. But we can be very proud that we've taken it up another full step.
Gigantic steps.
Yes.
You're solo tuned.
Yeah.
I see tuning.
It had to be said.
Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah.
I'm just, go ahead. I'm wondering, looking ahead 50 years from now, what are some of the goals for the ISB?
I hope I'm not still working.
We can't imagine. Sorry.
You won't be retired yet.
Yeah, that's right.
If I could take a stab at that, when I got on the board, thank you very much, Tom Knific. I naively thought that, with the advent of all this new technology, cell phones and stuff like that, I remember our first poll of the orchestra, we asked people, do you have dial-up or DSL? We really thought we were asking some really deep questions. I thought that in 5 or 10 years, we'd have a membership of 5,000 people. And we've stayed really consistent around 2,500 to 3,500. Whenever we have a party, i.e. a convention, it goes up because we only let people come to the convention that are members, and everybody wants to come to the convention. So my hope that like 25 years or 50 years from now, that the nature of people, we've seen this in many aspects in life, like with music, people don't buy CDs, they just look at videos of their favorite artists. So we have this challenge of people joining. Why would I become a member of the ISB when I can see videos of Gary Karr for free? I can see some bootleg music of John Clayton for free. I would hope that in like 25 or 50 years that people will see the value of being part of the entire family, and that our membership will not be so stagnant. I think we constantly are able to reach 2,500 or 3,000 people, but I think there are probably 2,500 bass players in New Jersey, and I'm wondering how come there aren't 2,500 bass players from New Jersey in the ISB. So my hope would be that we figure out how to deliver a message, because obviously we have a product, because people keep coming back, that there would just be, like when we put out our annual directory, the 100th anniversary, here are all the people that are members, it just costs $20 to mail because it's like the Penn State alumni book or something like that.
What I really love about our bass community is the addition and execution of youth bass ensembles and bass camps in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And I think that has escalated those numbers quite significantly, especially being able to teach younger children, one, to be able, that they are able to play the bass now with the new technology that we have, two, to be able to experience that live experience other than just getting a bootleg or a CD. And then also knowing that they're a part of this really great family, and they get to meet the wonderful Gary Karr, know that we love them just the same, that they feel a part of something. I knew when I was younger I didn't feel a part of something until I got to college and high school, and I found my bass family. So that was, I think that is definitely one of the best ways to go forward so far. Keep going down.
And like Douglas, piggybacking on what Douglas was saying, like word of mouth is the most powerful thing out there. And all of you are here experiencing this amazing event. And if you go tell 5 people at home about how great the ISB is, I mean, we live in a digital age, but there's nothing like word of mouth to keep this thing going and growing. And any other questions?
I have one. Who's the friend of the bass? Who's a friend of the who's a friend of the bass? ISB every 2 years gives out special recognition awards, and one of those categories is friend of the bass, for somebody who goes above and beyond for the bass family. And this year, that person's Jason Heath.
Totally unexpected. But
yes,
thank you, David, for asking me to do this. Kind of an interloper as a
everybody tune in to his contrabass conversations.
I've talked to almost everybody up here. So.
They're awesome. Tune in.
Yeah,
I mean, you can hear them online. They're fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the
shrink wrapped for freshness.
Best diffused by.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you. That means so much to me. I can't even tell you. So, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks. We appreciate
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
I am honored beyond words at getting this recognition award, friend of the bass. I'm looking at the plaque right now. I was speechless when I got this. I had no idea that this was in the works. And I'd like to thank Nick Lloyd for nominating me. He nominated me a year ago. So this has been in place for a long time. And it's such a great gesture. So thank you to the ISB for doing that. We're going to have a lot more ISB coverage coming up here. We had this panel discussion today. We're going to be hearing from Gabriele Raggiante and Alberto Boccini about the sister organization, we'll call it the Bass Europe, and their 2018 convention in Lucca, Italy. Sound like a nice place? Oh yeah, I'm going to be going. My wife never wants to go on any of these bass excursions. She is on board for this one, and I can't wait to bring you that coverage. Again, contrabassconversations.com/ISB. You can follow along with these. And as always, reach out to me. I'm a friendly guy. I will respond. I love hearing from people. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com. And you can let me know a little bit about yourself. You can suggest a topic for the show, a guest idea. I keep track of all of that, and that shapes the direction as this show moves forward. And if you'd like to help move the show forward, share this out. I guarantee you there's someone in your circle that has never heard of this podcast. I'm convinced that even though we're growing and growing and continue to grow all the time, I know we're still just reaching a fraction, well, maybe more than a fraction, but we're only reaching a portion of the bass community. I'd like to reach as many people as possible, and you can help. Share this on Facebook, share this on Twitter, share it off of your phone if you're listening right now. Go to contrabassconversations.com, pick an episode that sounds cool, maybe the Gary Karr episode, last episode, that was a good one, and share that out. That would mean so much to me, and I really appreciate you listening to these episodes and following along with this crazy journey through the double bass world. We will see you again very soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.